Welcome back to Mill History Talk, the podcast where we dive deep into the battles, tactics, and strategies that shape modern warfare. I'm your host, Laura, and today we're going to explore a pivotal moment in recent military history, the Battle of Mosul in 2017. But not just the battle, we're focusing on a specific, chilling innovation that defined the battle: the lethal coordination of drones and vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices, or VbIEDs, by ISIS. The tactics developed here changed the face of urban warfare, and they're still echoing in conflict zones today. Let's get into it. Imagine a city in ruins. Mosul, once vibrant, now a landscape of shattered concrete and broken lives. From June 2014 to mid-2017, this city was ground zero for a dramatic and deadly confrontation between the Islamic State and a coalition of Iraqi and international forces. ISIS had seized Mosul and turned it into both a symbol and stronghold. But by October 2016, Iraqi security forces, backed by the US-led coalition, launched an offensive to retake the city. The battle would last nearly 9 months. It was urban warfare on a scale not seen since the Battle of Hue in 1968-1. ISIS, facing overwhelming firepower, got creative. And that's where our focus lies today. Lethal creativity. With their resources dwindling, they turned to cheap, commercial drones and modified civilian vehicles. And they didn't just use these separately. They fused them into a coordinated weapon system that brought deadly results. ISIS's VbIEDs were no slapdash operation. We're talking about full-on industrial-scale production. Picture this: civilian vehicles, ordinary sedans, trucks, even construction equipment, were stripped to their bones. ISIS engineers reinforced them with layers of crude but effective metal plating, bolted and welded by hand. The plates weren't just for show. They were meant to resist small arms fire and buy the suicide driver a few extra seconds to reach the target. And then came the payload. Hundreds of kilograms of explosives packed into the chassis, the trunk, even under the seats. Some of these vehicles were equipped with slat armor. That's the metal cage-like grid designed to deflect RPG rounds and confuse the trajectory of shaped charges. It's something you'd expect on an MRAP, not a hijacked city vehicle turned into a rolling bomb. ISIS took design cues from professional military platforms, adapting whatever they could with shocking efficiency. The drivers? They weren't always volunteers. Reports and testimonies suggest many were drugged with amphetamines or opiates, locked inside the vehicle, and sent down a narrow alley or straight toward a checkpoint. Some believed they were on a one-way mission to paradise. Others may not have understood until it was too late. And these weren't just parked car bombs or haphazard suicide attacks. They were deployed tactically. ISIS used VbIEDs to spearhead assaults, shatter enemy momentum, and strike fear deep behind front lines. They'd time the attacks to hit command posts, convoy choke points, or during moments of tactical vulnerability. This wasn't improvisation. It was strategy. The vehicles themselves came from garages and hidden lots scattered across the city. ISIS had a shadow logistics system, a war economy set up in back alleys and basements. Mechanics turned bomb makers worked in shifts. Some workshops specialized in armor, others in explosives, others in concealment and camouflage. It was Mosul's dark industrial revolution, and it churned out VbIEDs like an assembly line. These vehicles weren't just parked bombs, they were active shock weapons. ISIS used them to break up advancing formations, target command posts, and deliver psychological terror. The vehicles came out of garages and hidden lots around the city, repurposed workshops operating like wartime assembly lines. Now add drones to the mix. Off-the-shelf DJI Phantoms and Mavics, yeah, the ones you can get online, became key battlefield tools. But ISIS didn't just use them for a bird's-eye view. They became instruments of precision death. These commercial drones were retrofitted with handmade payload release mechanisms. Simple servo motors controlled by the flight operator could drop modified grenades or bomblets right onto unsuspecting troops. It turned the airspace over Mosul into a predator's playground. ISIS drone operators weren't just improvising. They had training, roles, and responsibilities. Some were teenagers, others were skilled techs who had adapted quickly. They flew from inside buildings, behind walls, or even from beneath tarps in narrow alleys. The signal range was extended with boosters. The imagery was crystal clear thanks to the drone's commercial-grade HD cameras. But that's just part of it. ISIS didn't limit itself to quadcopters. Sirkin Balkan and other analysts noted that the group deployed fixed-wing UAVs as well, those with longer range and higher payload capacity. Some were effectively kamikaze drones, packed with explosives and flown directly into targets. Others hovered above, providing ISR support to ground forces or queuing up VbIEDs for detonation. What's really chilling is how these drones were used in coordinated waves. One drone might bait out a squad's position. Another would fly in minutes later to drop a munition. A third would hang high, recording it all for propaganda. It wasn't random. It was layered, tactical, sophisticated. ISIS understood something important. In modern urban warfare, controlling the air above the rooftops, those 50 feet of vertical battle space, can be just as decisive as owning the ground below. And it gets more complex. Circon Balkan's research found that ISIS had fixed-wing drones too. Longer range, kamikaze style. These weren't just improvised tools. They were part of a deliberate, well-managed drone warfare program. One chilling example of this integrated drone VbIED tactic came during the fighting in the Al-Zanjili neighborhood of western Mosul, a dense urban maze of alleyways, crumbling buildings, and tight turns that favored defenders. Iraqi forces had stalled, bogged down by sniper fire, booby traps, and the narrow confines that made coordinated movement almost impossible. The area was heavily contested, and it was here that ISIS chose to launch a textbook demonstration of their hybrid tactics. It began with a drone, a quiet, hovering presence that Iraqi troops had grown to fear. It loitered over the intersection, seemingly unarmed, just observing. Troops on the ground knew better than to ignore it, but they had no effective means of bringing it down. As they tried to reposition vehicles for better cover, the drone captured their every move in real time. Suddenly, from a concealed garage just down the block, a tan-colored Toyota Land Cruiser, up-armored and packed with explosives, burst onto the street. The timing was perfect. The drone had tracked the convoy's positioning and signaled the go-ahead. The VbIED driver accelerated, barreling down the alleyway, shrugging off small arms fire, thanks to welded steel plating. It reached the front of the column and detonated with catastrophic force. The explosion was deafening. The lead Humvee was instantly vaporized, and the concussive force knocked several soldiers off their feet. As chaos erupted, the same drone, or a second circling slightly higher, began dropping grenades on survivors and first responders. Each drop was coordinated with surgical precision, adding insult to injury. All of it was captured in high-definition video, beamed live to ISIS operators, and later edited into propaganda. The footage was used to glorify martyrdom, to demoralize Iraqi troops, and to signal to ISIS fighters and sympathizers worldwide that the group still held power, even in the face of superior firepower. The Zanjili attack wasn't just effective, it was terrifying. It illustrated how ISIS could use commercial tools and battlefield cunning to transform a small stretch of city into a lethal trap. It wasn't just about explosives or ambushes. It was about synchronization. The drones identified and tracked targets. The VbIED executed the strike, and drones returned to drop follow-up munitions and collect footage. The whole operation was conducted within minutes. That attack marked a shift. Iraqi commanders began rethinking how they maneuvered through city streets. No area was considered safe without air cover or drone countermeasures. The battlefield had expanded, not just forward and sideways, but upward. The sky over Mosul had become just as dangerous as the ground. The psychological impact? Tremendous. Iraqi and coalition troops began referring to the drones as killer bees. These buzzing threats overhead became a constant presence, an airborne anxiety that disrupted the rhythm of even routine operations. The unpredictability was what made them so effective. Troops knew the drones could be armed or unarmed, recording or guiding, baiting or bombing. That uncertainty created a constant mental strain. It was no longer enough to scan alleyways and rooftops. Every patrol had to watch the sky. Commanders noticed changes in troop behavior. Movements slowed. Units paused more frequently, checking for shadows flitting across building walls, an ominous signal that something was circling overhead. The knowledge that your position might already be relayed to an unseen drone operator made even the most experienced fighters hesitant. The tactical impact mirrored the mental toll. US and British advisors began introducing electronic warfare kits, gear designed to jam drone signals or sever their communication links mid-flight. Infantry squads were issued special weapons, shotguns for close-range counter-UAV work, net guns to entangle rotors, even trained sharpshooters tasked specifically with anti-drone overwatch. New SOPs emerged: limit open-air exposure, vary patrol routes, rotate positions quickly. But despite these adaptations, the initiative stayed with ISIS. They chose when to fly, when to strike, when to record. The coalition was reactive, constantly developing countermeasures to the last attack while a new tactic was already in play. The psychological fallout of facing an enemy that could see from above and strike from above shook conventional expectations of ground dominance. Coalition airstrikes ramped up to stop these tactics. As ISIS's use of drones and VbIEDs intensified, so did the urgency to eliminate their infrastructure. Coalition aircraft, mostly U.S., but also Iraqi and allied nations, began targeting suspected drone workshops, command centers, munitions stockpiles, and the shadow factories producing suicide vehicles. In many cases, these strikes were based on ISR gathered from the same urban environment ISIS was exploiting, creating a deadly feedback loop of surveillance and destruction. But this shift in tactics came at a cost. Civilian casualties began to climb. ISIS, knowing the precision limitations of air power in dense urban terrain, deliberately embedded their workshops and control hubs inside homes, schools, and apartment blocks. They used human shields not only to deter attacks, but to create public outrage and propaganda value when strikes inevitably killed non-combatants. For civilians trapped in Mosul, there was no safe quarter. Entire neighborhoods were flattened. Places like the Jadida and Bab al-Bid districts bore the brunt of these campaigns. Organizations like Air Wars documented the scale of this devastation. On several occasions, the deadliest days of the campaign correlated with efforts to eliminate VbIED convoys or drone control hubs. In one infamous incident, a coalition strike intended to hit a sniper nest instead collapsed a building filled with over 100 civilians. The moral and strategic implications were profound. The coalition had to weigh the cost of each tactical victory against the erosion of legitimacy in the eyes of Mosul's population and the world. This was war at its most complex, fought not just in alleyways and skies, but in hearts, headlines, and the digital sphere. What happened in Mosul didn't stay in Mosul. These tactics, especially the integration of drones and VbIEDs, were a preview of what was coming. In Gaza, Hamas adapted many of these techniques, small drones dropping bombs, kamikaze quadcopters. And in Ukraine, it's gone even further. There, both sides use drones for ISR, combat, and loitering munition strikes. The tactics we first saw in Mosul are now standard in modern urban warfare. Mosul showed us something vital. You don't need billions in tech to dominate a battlefield. Sometimes, all you need is a GoPro, a cheap quadcopter, and a brutal idea. ISIS's tactics in Mosul were barbaric, but they were also innovative. And in warfare, innovation, even from an enemy, must be studied, understood, and countered. The urban battlefield is changing. The low sky is the new front line. And Mosul was just the beginning. Thanks for listening to Mill History Talk. If you like this episode, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a review. I'm Laura, and we'll see you next time as we explore another turning point in military history.